Hello, everybody. This is the second half of my interview with economist and psychologist Michael Muthukrishna. Please check out the first half if you haven't already. In this second part, we talk about the challenges of innovations, especially that AI systems are posing, and the question of whether moral or spiritual progress is possible. Let's get started. You do touch on this in your framework for innovation, the sort of compass model that you provide, right? And you talk about adjacent possible zone. Could you very briefly walk us through that model of?
Sure. Yeah. So, I got to tell you, I try to be a good science communicator. I really do. But I could do better. And what I was really trying to do was how do I distill all of this research on innovation into something that's you can use as a kind of framework.
Right.
And I put these letters together. I'm like, oh God, what do I turn this into? And actually it was my assistant Zoe who was like, I think I can make it compass. I'm like, beautiful. Let's do that.
Yes. It works. Yeah.
So, it kind of works. I use it with companies. They seem to like it, but I'm sure it can be better.
Yeah.
So, the compass is really trying to give you some insights on especially things that you might not think about innovation. C is basically innovations come through the collective brain. It's not just about finding 10x engineers. It's about finding 10x engineers who can work with one another in a collective manner. So you get 100x teams, So it's about it's about collective cognition. It's about finding ways to bridge gaps and, make ideas more inclusive so that they flow through to one another, right? O is off the beaten track. So, if a lot of the ideas are not doing the same thing. They're trying to do something a little bit different, right? You have to, what do they say? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result, right?
Right.
So, companies often, they don't think about the fact that actually, let's take AI. Business as usual is not going to work. M, it stands for the magpie strategy, right? Magpies in folklore are known for going out and looking for things and then recombining them, right? Sometimes I call this intellectual arbitrage. So the quickest way to be creative, I know Joe Henrik does this. I certainly do. Lots of smart people I know do this, is you basically are looking for solutions in a different discipline, in someone else's head. The solutions to your problems are spread across the heads of many people. And that's, if you look across, the history of innovation, we see this constantly, right? Vulcanized rubber, right? Charles Goodyear. How does he know that vulcanized rubber, he burns a bit of rubber, notices it changes in its composition. It's now hard. How does he know that that's useful? Because he was hanging out at the India Roxbury company and he's got these misshapen rubber. He's like, they need to be harder. I don't know how to solve it. How many people burn rubber? Probably tons. But you have to have a prepared mind for it. You have to intention, and you can do this intentionally. How many Nobel Prizes in economics have been won by taking some idea from psychology? So there's ways to do this. P is the paradox of diversity. There's an elephant in the room. Look, there's a lot of discussion in London around diversity, but there's, look, the truth is diversity is fuel for innovation, because a lot of innovations are through recombinations of different ideas into something new. But diversity is also divisive by definition, right? If you and I didn't speak the same language, we're not going to be able to spread ideas and learn from one another, right? If I came to the UK, they drive on the left-hand side of the road, I'm like, the right way to drive is the right-hand side of the road. I bring my culture and I demand that I do it this way. It's not going to work. There's coordination problems. So this is the paradox of diversity, and there's different ways to solve it. You can solve it by, finding a common path, but also through translators and bridges, people trained in multiple fields, people trained in different areas, things like that. A, as you said, is the adjacent possible. So in evolutionary systems can't often make these massive leaps. Now, cultural systems can to some degree, often through serendipity or recombination, but that's because you can have horizontal transmission, like the way bacteria does. You can have this. Whereas with humans, so if we needed wings, something changed, we needed wings suddenly to survive. No bueno, we're not going to get wings because they're just too far away. But if you need to adjust skin color, if you need to adjust eye shape, hair type, if you need to adjust even number of fingers is possible. These are adjacent possibilities for humans, right? The same in if you look, Cesar Hidalgo has this nice work on what he calls a product space, and he shows that companies and countries that go into industries that are kind of just adjacent to what they already do, that's what tends to happen, and that's what tends to work, right? You already are making wood chips, you can move to paper. You already do, garments, you can move to high-end garments, or maybe other kinds of fabrics for the insides of aircrafts or something, So that's adjacent possibilities. The last the two S's are that because of these forces, it often pays it's often better to be social than it is to be smart. And certainly for society, it's better to be social than it is to be smart. So what I mean by that is high IQ is great, but a high IQ that isn't exposed to the problems of the day, that isn't exposed to potential solutions, it's not going to spread those ideas. It's like what you said. It wouldn't know, like it's too far ahead. It doesn't know how to bridge that gap. Right.
Right.
So you
Right.
have to,
Right.
the social aspect, understanding the people is very important. And then the final thing is that, the sharing. It's essential that you create a culture where ideas can flow and then you're sharing those ideas with one another. If people are like preserving the whole thing, the collective brain doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah. No, it's very
thousands of
helpful. I mean, I
papers.
think it's a really helpful frame for innovation. One of the other things I was struck by was the very clear evidence that humans tend to be, at least in comparison to chimps, more imitators than emulators. And I wonder if there's a relationship between imitation and innovation, or at least it seems like there's a tension there. But because if we're such fundamentally kind of mimetic kind of animal, then how is it that we are capable of innovation? I wonder if you might be able to walk us through that Horner and Whiten experiment on chimps and humans, and then say a little bit about the relationship between imitation and innovation, perhaps.
So the first thing is, the Horner and Whiten paper is a lovely demonstration of how we have a bunch of recipes that we acquire from other people and we copy them without a real understanding. We feel like we understand it. What's called the illusion of explanatory depth, but we don't. So what Horner and Whiten did was they took some young chimps and some young children, and they gave them this box, right? And the box has a hole on the top and a hole on the side. And the experimenter pokes a hole through the top and pokes a hole through the side. And in doing so is able to retrieve a piece of fruit for the chimps and retrieve a sticker for the kids. So, okay, experimenter pokes a hole through the top, pokes a hole through the side, hands it to the chimp. What does the chimp do? Pokes a hole through the top, pokes a hole through the side, gets its piece of fruit, happy chimp. Then the experimenter does the same thing, hole through the top, hole through the side, hands it to a child. What does the child do? Well, pokes a hole through the top, pokes a hole through the side, happy child, it's got a sticker. Now in the key variation, they use the same box, but now instead of a kind of opaque box where you can't see what it is, the box is clear. It's completely transparent. And you realize that first action, there's a kind of ceiling, it's the top compartment. It doesn't do anything. The only action that retrieves the fruit and the sticker is that second action, the side hole. But again, what the experimenter does, they poke their hole through the top and poke their hole through the side. Now, when you hand it to a chimp, chimps are smart. I don't know if you can watch them scrolling on Instagram or, solving working memory. They're smart, right? They're like, forget that first action. I'm going straight for the second action. I'm going to get that piece of fruit. And they get their fruit and they're super happy. But when the experimenters poke their hole through the top, poke their hole through the side and hand it to the child, what does the child do? Pokes the hole through the top, pokes the hole through the side. So now kids are not stupid, like completely stupid, but they often assume, unless they have other reason to think otherwise, that adults know what they're doing. And they want to do it the same way. Because the world is way too complicated. You walk around engaging with technologies that may as well be magic to you.
Right.
How does a computer work? How does it talk to the router? How does this thing produce an image on the screen? How does it happen in real time? Who knows, right? Who knows?
Right.
But you know how to use it, and you do it because you've copied a bunch of recipes. You brush your teeth a particular way. You eat 3 times a day. You sleep for 8 hours. You do all these things because that's how it's always been done, and you don't realize it. You don't notice it until someone else does it. But here's the thing: remember what I said about evolution? 3 ingredients: variation, transmission, selection. You have to have faithful transmission for an evolutionary system to work. Otherwise, it's too noisy. If mutation rates are way higher, as they are if you're doing your own thing, or genes were suddenly mutating, it wouldn't work. So that's an essential component of the cultural evolutionary system that we copy without fully understanding. Now, to get to your second question, which is, well, then where do the innovations come from? That leaves kind of 3 ways. So one is, accidents. When you copy things, you don't copy them exactly. And sometimes you serendipitously discover something brand new, right? Lots of innovations. Velcro, vulcanized rubber, as I said before, artificial sweeteners, Teflon, famously
3M,
penicillin.
Yeah.
All of these things. These are all accidental innovations. But there's also recombination, right? So yes, we're copying faithfully, but we have different sources of information. We study different disciplines. Rob Boyd was able to solve some of the math in evolutionary biology because of his training as a physicist. He knew how to handle certain types of reciprocal equations because you have to be able to do that in physics, right? And so the serendipity, but then of course we're not we do develop, the collective brain makes the individual brain more intelligent. We are smarter because we have a bunch of tools and ways of thinking that make each of us brighter. beyond, like, it's not just our genetic capacity. And yes, there are individual differences between us for a variety of reasons, not just genes, but exposure to your prenatal environment and pathogens and lead and, all those kinds of things, but also, and, just your home environment, but also simply because over time we have a bunch of new skills that make each of us more intelligent. And that gives us partial causal models of the world that allow us to operate and make things better. So you kind of understand how your router works, or, your a stove works. If you turn it on and off again, that often will fix it, right? Because you have a partial causal model of the world. And I can give you examples of how it makes us more intelligent, but, reading, obviously, but also like counting. These are cultural skills, not like human skills.
Right. Yeah. No, that's very helpful. Yeah. No, that's great. There's a lot to say, I suppose, about the beauty of innovation. Let's talk about the dark side of the burdens of innovation, and maybe a good test case might be AI, which I think you talk about as a kind of second industrial revolution. The possibilities of progress are immense, and yet there are also immense challenges in terms of inequality, the energy use, and the resource intensive, resource intensive these are. Could you talk about your sense of both the promise and pitfalls of AI, at least as you're seeing it, and sort of prospects for the future there?
Yeah, of course. So, the first thing to say is that, so actually people talk about the fourth, fourth industrial revolution. From my perspective, there was really one industrial revolution. Yes, there were other advances, but it was really the first, and, the others are kind of shadows of it. And what preceded the industrial revolution was the Enlightenment and scientific revolution. And what I argue is that what we're in is not the second industrial revolution, but actually the second Enlightenment. So remember, the Enlightenment was a swapping of ideas at an unprecedented scale through coffee shops and these networks of pamphlets being spread around. Today, it's happening on X. It's happening on LinkedIn. It's happening through podcasts. It's happening on Substack, right? We're living through a second Enlightenment where the old ways are being challenged, and we're coming up with new cultural evolution is on steroids at the moment. And now that might lead to a second industrial revolution if we crack the next energy barrier, right? Like if we invest more in nuclear, that'll be part of it. If we crack fusion, we're going to the stars, baby.
Right.
So that's, I think, the kind of moment we're in. And I agree with a lot of people who think that this is probably the most important century in human history, because this is the century where we either destroy ourselves or we head to the stars. Like there's two paths in front of us, And so that's the thing. So once the scale of cooperation hits a certain level, our capacity for destruction just goes up with it, right? There's been a decline in violence. The Pinker wasn't the first to say it, but he's most noted about it. There's been a decline in violence, but there was also been blips. World War I and World War II. From my perspective, and from the perspective, I think, cultural evolution, these are not blips. They're part of the same process. As we cooperate at a higher scale within those cooperative units, within, let's say, the United States, within the European Union, within the UK, whatever, people are less likely to kill one another, right? There's not a lot of wars going on within the United States. But if a war breaks out, it's now between two larger units or multiple larger units. So that's one part of it. But also, as technology advances, our capacity for good and our capacity to just destroy everything has gone. Our weapons, fusion
we can obliterate ourselves immediately.
Obliterate it all.
Yeah.
So going back to AI, AI is an example of this, right? So first off, we're making a big bet. We are putting a whole bunch. Thankfully, we're investing in a lot more energy as well, so that'll be great. We're restarting nuclear reactors. We are, grabbing solar where we can. We are doing, firing on all cylinders, because the training of these models. So one of the things about, human brains versus these, AI brains is that, first off, training and inference is one and the same for humans. And although the neurons in our head, which are still about 100 to 1,000 times as large as even the most advanced GPT model, they are quite energy efficient. So, it's about 20 watts that you use in your, 12 to 20 watts that you're using at any, as we have this conversation. AI uses megawatts, perhaps gigawatts in training. Now, actually, in inference, it's about the same level as, it's about 10 watts or so. When you start talking to the GPT, it's not actually a hugely inefficient process, but the training is. And so we need these vast amounts of energy, vast amounts of compute. We taught sand to think. How amazing, we need the silicon, we need the chips and so on, but it requires a lot. That's a big bet, and it has environmental consequences. Now, the bet is that it leads to an age of abundance. It gives us more energy more technology, more ability to repair the damage that we are doing. But it's a bet humanity is making. Overall, I'm hopeful. I think it's a good bet. I don't know if this generation of AI is the right move because, like I said, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that intelligence works, which is an ongoing conversation I have. But I think once we crack a few of these things, we are going to see there's no principled reason for why, or at least we have not discovered a principled reason for why wet computing in our brains is fundamentally non-recreatable in silica. However, what we currently have, the models that we currently have are very different. So, like we have differentiated neurons that do different things. We have, what we have looks more like a rainforest ecosystem. And, the kind of intelligence that AI have is like grid rows of crops, very, very limited ecosystem that now there might be things going on there that mean that AI architecture needs to change. Remember the transformer architecture in the very famous, attention is all you need paper. That's very recent, right? So that was like,
yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if we've even begun to scratch the surface of how much our whatever intelligence is related to embodiment, to everything like microbiome, and then of course the big question of consciousness, which we still have no idea what it is, right? And so I think we have a long way to go sorting this out. But it's very clear that there are challenges, not sort of. I mean, there's of course big threats to wiping out humanity, but also we're seeing in terms of some of the fundamental issues around human dignity, around the kinds of. I mean, this is a similar problem to the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution around exploitation and really this kind of the benefits not accruing sort of uniformly, right? And so I think there is a sense in which innovations create winners and losers, and I wonder if you might comment on just the extent to which that sense of fragility of humanity could be maybe exacerbated or amplified in ways that could be, really destructive. Because I think that's a critical issue to sort through.
I mean, actually, right in front of me is a report that I'm producing for the UNDP on this exact topic on between and within inequality of AI, specifically in Asia Pacific. But so you're absolutely right, and it is also what happened right during the Industrial Revolution. We put the shoemakers and tailors out of work, and they were real upset about it. Some of them tried to burn the factories down. There will be new opportunities, right? You got to remember, like 6 out of 10 jobs, it's been estimated that 6 out of 10 jobs we do today did not exist before 1940. Computer used to be a job. If you watch the movie Hidden Figures, they were computers. And then came along the electronic computer, and now the only computer we ever talk about is the electronic computer. We dropped the electronic because it's the only computer, right? So there's going to be this reshuffling. Now, the concern is that reshuffling is not random. It's not just opportunity. It is going to be, if you think what it may lead to is another great divergence. So when industrialization took place, it gave Europe an unprecedented capacity for growth and expansion, which, fueled colonialization. Like when I talked about every metric going up, it first happened in Europe, right? Like, so all of those metrics ran away in Europe on the back of industrialization. Prior to that, you wouldn't have necessarily guessed that it was going to be Europe. China had a good shot at it. Those metrics, and so the world is still going through kind of a great convergence, right? In part due to the shipping container, as I describe in my book. Suddenly China and South Korea could take advantage of their cheaper manufacturing and ship it to the United States with all kinds of economic and geopolitical consequences. Now, AI, potentially, if it really is as revolutionary and as kind of industry altering as some expect it to be, there are going to be massive winners and losers.
Yeah.
At the extreme, people like those models are concentrated in the hands of a few, not just a few countries, but in fact a few companies.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So United States, China are the two biggest players. There's not a lot of other foundation models out there. Other countries are consumers. So we really have to think very carefully about strategic investments and policies that allow for countries to solve their problems with access to these models, right? So there's massive leapfrogging potential here.
Yeah.
It's an overused term, but if for the longest time, we waited for electricity to spread across the African continent. Solar panels are potentially closing, are helping close the gap. Or a better example is perhaps telephone lines. We waited the longest time to give telephony and internet to remote areas of the globe. Thanks to the cell phone and now I suppose Starlink, we have access to the internet in the most remote regions, right? And it leapfrogged the need for all of that infrastructure that happened before. So today, there are teacher shortages, in a lot of places I work in, where, yeah, it'd be great if we could just train more teachers and invest more, but maybe teachers supported by everyone having their own AI tutor is a way to enhance education across the globe. Traffic and corruption are a serious problem in various parts of Southeast Asia and South Asia for that matter. AI might be able to help with the traffic management and also help, track corruption, right? But only if we deploy it like that. It's not going to happen. We have to, and this is what this report actually for UNDP is all about. It's like, let's talk to APEC. Let's talk about this. And you're not, one of the mistakes we make is just looking at the past. Like the past is only a guide when it comes to a new technology, right? Like this isn't the same as the Industrial Revolution. It's not the same as electricity. It's not the same as computers or the internet. In fact, it has new capacities because it is a thinking agent that ranges from augmenting human capacities to completely automating and replacing them.
Right.
And that means that there are going to be people who are left behind. And we have to think very carefully at a systems level about how we approach that problem without distorting incentives to a dangerous degree. And I need another podcast to do that with you.
Right. Yeah. To solve all of the world's problems. Perhaps one more big question then is, you talk a lot about sort of the cultural software in your book that's driving us. And I wonder if you see any innovations in one might call sort of the fundamental sort of orientation of these softwares. What I mean by that is something like our propensity to really value each other as human beings, or one might call sort of a spiritual intelligence or something along those lines. You have this other project on the sort of database of religions. Do you see innovation happening there at the level of human, not consciousness in the sense of in a simple sense, but in the kind of one might call moral sensibilities? Is there moral progress or moral innovation or spiritual innovation, perhaps?
Yeah, progress is relative, obviously. I have my opinions about what constitutes progress, but I also recognize that I'm coming from a very specific, largely Western Christian tradition, and that's what I impose on the way I think about these problems. But there has been, right? Religions, the major world religions have a lot of similarities compared to smaller religions because that is what enables a religion to become a major world religion, right? Like, have large families, be there for at least co-religionists, look after one another, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. These things emerge because if you think about it, right? Quakers, they, have kids at about the same rate as the US population, which is it's not amazing. Now there was an offshoot of the Quakers called the Shakers. Do you know any Quakers, Brandon?
No, Quakers, no.
No Quakers. Okay. Well, people speak, I have a few Quaker friends. Nobody has Shaker friends because the Shakers, the Shakers believed in celibacy for everyone. They only grew through adoption of children. That is not a strategy. Now, if you contrast the Shakers with the Mormons were also an obscure cult. But if you're practicing polygamy in large families, you're making the big leagues, baby. And they did, right? They did.
Yeah.
Now, these are examples of traits that religions possess that allow them to grow. Now, that's the baseline. Now, within the major world religions, there are differences. There are differences in what is believed, and there are differences in how society gets structured on the back of that. I'll give you two examples. Now, it's not always practiced this way, but most of the time, two claims really led to the spread of Christianity as a major world religion. Two claims. This offshoot of Judaism. Judaism is not a major world religion. We care about it a lot in part because of its link to Islam and Christianity. But one rabbi, son of God, he comes along and he says, first innovation comes from Judaism. And that innovation is, it's not, so before, remember, is your God better than my God? Nobody knows. It's not that I don't believe in your God. I just think my God's better. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to head to the battlefield and we're going to see whose God is better. That was how it worked. And if you want to be like, oh, turns out I'm worshiping Zeus now, Right. But Judaism makes an interesting claim for monotheism. They say it's not that your God is better than my God's better than your God. Your God doesn't even exist.
Right.
Hero Israel, God is one. Okay.
Right.
And if you look, there's two books of Genesis, right? You've got Adam and Eve story, and then you've got the 7-day story. The 7-day story is written during the Babylonian exile because they want to show that all those Babylonian gods the sun and the moon. No. Our God made all of those. They're not gods. They're just things that our God made in his spare time. Took him a day, just built it.
That's right.
Like, so that's, that's the first thing. The second thing is, the idea of spreading that religion beyond, so it doesn't have to be like through birth. To be Jewish, you got to have a Jewish mother. It's not so much about the conversion. There's a spread in part by Paul, spreading around. And this is a major shift. And it goes alongside a few really radical innovations. Love your enemy.
Right.
You don't find that. You don't find that in many words. You kill your enemy is what you find more common.
Right. Exactly.
Love your enemy? That's bizarre. That's wild. That's crazy. This is one thing. Now, the other thing that happens in Christianity, and, Jonathan Schultz and Joe Henrich have done some really great work on this, is the banning of cousin marriage and the restructuring of European families. So around the world, people marry their cousins, some at very high rates, right? Like Pakistan, rates are like 50, 60%. In some communities in Britain, rates are at 90% marrying their cousins.
Yeah.
At that point, by the way, you're approaching the marriage of half siblings, really. It's not great for genetics, but actually it's not just the genetics. It actually seals off communities from one another, right? If you're only marrying, first off, endogamous marriage, so marrying only your co-ethnics, that seals off the community, but, ethnicities can be large. When you're marrying only your cousins, there's only a limited number of family members to marry. It cuts you off from the rest of the world. And it leads to tribalism that undermines states. So what happened in Europe, the idea of a traditional family, there's nothing traditional about it. Most human societies have family webs. Your uncle is related to you in a variety of ways because, two sisters got married to two brothers and then their kids got married and, some wild stuff going on, right? Whereas in Europe, because of the banning of this, of cousin marriage and the restructuring, we get mom, dad, aunts and uncles, grandparents, you get this kind of family tree instead. Now, what happens? What happens is that European tribes disappear. Like now I live in the UK. Where are the Angles? Where are the Saxons? Where are the Vikings? Where are the Norse? I'll tell you where they are. They're all married to one another. They're gone. The tribes are gone. They're all married to one another, right? So Europe destroys that. And that is the basis. So remember I was talking about scales of cooperation? Those lower scales undermine higher scales. If you're favoring your friends and family, it undermines states. That's what we call cronyism. That's what we call nepotism. That's what we call cronyism. Yeah. So in these other places, democracy often doesn't work because tribes dominate as the optimal scale of cooperation. Europe destroys those, and it leads to all kinds of other beliefs that are not found around the world. One example of this is impartial application of the law. That is not what we find. Like other countries try to replicate this, but in practice, it just doesn't happen, right? There's a psychologist, Franz Treppenau, and he has this really interesting set of data. So he asked people around the world, he says, you're driving in a car with your place with, like cousin, let's say your cousin, right? It could be a brother, it could be a friend. Driving in the car with your cousin. No, let's make it a friend because it makes the story, like you're driving in a car with your friend and he hits somebody. The lawyer comes up to you and says, listen, you're the only other witness. If you lie, the friend gets off. Questions are this. Should you lie for your friend? Cousin, family member, whatever. Does your friend have an obligation? An expectation that you can lie for? Does your friend have an obligation and would you actually do it?
Right.
Now, if you ask a lot of Scandinavians, for example, right across Scandinavia, they're like, of course not. I would never. It doesn't matter if it's my brother. They did something wrong. Like they have to face the punishment.
Yeah.
Latin America, the opposite,
Exactly.
Or in Africa, the opposite. It's like, what? The law? Yeah. Who cares about the law? That's my friend. Yeah. That's my cousin. That's my brother. That's my whatever. I'm not going to lie for it. Of course I'm going to lie. Like I'm going to tell them any story they want so they don't have to go to jail. So now, is that spiritual progress? Is that moral progress? It's tricky, right? From my perspective, yes, it is moral progress. It has led to higher scales of cooperation. And from my perspective, working together at a higher scale is both a secular and religious goal that is shared, right? Our ability to cooperate and coordinate with one another at a higher scale. And in order to do that, you have to do away with some of these lower things, but it comes at a cost. And I think we need to mitigate some of those, like loneliness. But of course, it makes you a worse friend, right? Scandinavians are worse friends. They are worse family members because they're not going to practice loyalty under all circumstances. Okay. And we often also think, remember the tensions we talked about during this call, we also think about being there for family and, la familia è tutti, like family is everything. We think of this as a virtue. But in fact, yes, it is a kind of virtue, but when expressed against the competing, let's say the state or institution or higher scale of humanity, it is in fact the source of corruption and the source of poverty in many places around the world.
Yeah, loyalty and corruption are, deeply,
Yes, we have made spiritual progress and religious progress, but I think One of the things, remember I said competition is part of this? I would love to reignite the competition between, religious worldviews. And I think there's a moment right now. I think we need to be able to talk to one another about what we really believe and think through the consequences of that. Obviously, no, we're not coercing one another.
Without the wars.
Without the wars, exactly. Without the wars, an intellectual discussion around, because, in the Vatican, for example, you and I were there. I don't know if, but we met each other there at one point.
Right.
One of the things, no, actually, it wasn't with you. It was a different time at the Vatican. While I was there, I had the chance to talk to some of the bishops, and I said, like, as a church, we look backwards so much. We want to know what Augustine said. We want to know what Aquinas said. We want to know what the doctors of the church said. No. What we should care about is what the Aquinas and the Augustines of today have to say about today. They were not God. Like, they were just smart men and women of their age, like trying to make the best of what happens in the world. Like, if you want to be relevant, we need to think, okay, what would Augustine or someone like Augustine say about today? How would they project forward? And it requires a kind of confidence in, that this is the truth, the revealed truth of the world, in order to be able to say, actually, because otherwise, based on what Augustine said, we're arguing over history, based on what Augustine said, blah, blah, blah. Augustine was talking about, how do I reconcile the fact that God has foreknowledge of the future with the fact that I have free will? And he didn't have anything at his disposal. He didn't have Einsteinian space-time understanding, right? He says God must be outside the timeline such that his memory of the future is no different to our memory of the past. Just because I have a memory of the past doesn't mean that I didn't have a choice there. Just as God's memory of the future doesn't mean I have a choice. I don't have a choice there. But he doesn't know that actually space-time is a thing, right? He doesn't know any of this stuff. Like, what given? So we have to. I don't know if this is the direction you want to go in, but what did St. John Paul say? He said, faith and reason are the two wings with which we fly. We seriously need to bring those back together. And, science and faith once more kind of reunited. And I want to say that across world religions, because if we cannot criticize other religions, if we cannot criticize these things, we make no progress. Going back to the collective brain, innovations in any domain only happen in the free flow of ideas.
Yeah. And it seems then it's really incumbent on us to figure out how to create a kind of more positive sum, approach to all of these things, rather than the kind of scarcity mentality that we're caught up in, which are reinforcing our sense of tribalism. Michael, we've gone past time, but I want to maybe ask you if you could point us to anything you're working on that you're really excited about, where our viewers and listeners could learn about your work. Anything else you want to share with us as we close?
Yeah, of course. So a couple of things, one is, although I've got the LSE banner in me, I will continue to be a professor at the LSE, but I'm moving to New York, moving to NYU. So I'm going to be a joint professor across that. And I'm doing that for a variety of reasons, but in part, I am setting up a Center for Human Progress. So it'll be a transatlantic Center for Human Progress, one in New York, one in London. We are partnered with the Global Solutions Initiative as a pathway to policy in Europe. And hopefully partnered with UNDP as a pathway to policy in the United States and the world, I suppose.
Fantastic.
And in part, it's because, like I said at the beginning of this call, I never meant to be an academic. And sometimes it feels like, as an academic, we're in the comments section. There's stuff happening in the world and we write stuff about it.
Right.
I don't want to be in the comments section. And I also think that, it's incumbent on us, like, decisions are being made whether we like it or not. And if we feel like there's a better way to make decisions that are better for more people and less tribal, let's say, then I think we should do that. And so part of, the Center for Human Progress, again, we're not writing a bunch of stuff. We're just going out there. We're building things. I'm still an engineer. We're building things out there in the world. One of our projects is that we have a new city that we're developing in Zanzibar, Fumba City. And the reason is we don't have a good model of development. We just don't, right? And, with the end of USAID and all of these, we do need a new model of development. And why do we need a new model? A few reasons. One, Africa is one of the few places still producing human beings. Two, we talk a lot about immigration, right? And the challenges that mass immigration bring, illegal immigration across the southern border in the United States, across the Mediterranean in Europe. These are issues, but they're two-sided issues. They're supply and demand, right? And they're two-sided because people are coming in part for the social welfare systems and the economic opportunities, but they're coming because their countries of origin suck. Right? They don't have the opportunity. One of the things that keeps me up at night is that there is a major gap between talent and opportunity in the world, right? There are people of immense capability who are unable to express that capability for the betterment of humanity simply because of the happenstance of their birth. Be that in a lower class of society, be that in a country that has limited options. Passport privilege is a major thing on this planet. So we need a model of development, and I think startup cities, commerce, like creating Hong Kong, creating Singapore, creating Guangzhou, Shenzhen in East Africa, and then using it as a model that might spread around. That's one of the things that's most exciting. But more broadly, we have the Center for Human Progress. We're trying to solve these problems. If you're interested, if you're value aligned, get in touch. We're at the ground floor of a lot of this stuff.
Fantastic. Well, we'll put links to everything in the show notes, and hopefully people can follow up with you. But Michael, it's been such a delight to have you on the show. Thanks again for taking the time.
Pleasure, Brandon. Great conversation. Thank you.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone who would find it of interest. Also, please subscribe and leave us a review if you haven't already. Thanks, and see you next time.